Hi everybody, this is Bob Iacino from Path Trading Partners with my ever-present co-founder Mike Arnold, and this is Trendlines for trading cryptocurrencies and traditional markets, part 3, using Trendlines. If you have not watched part 1 and 2, you won't get this, so please do. So let's talk about using Trendlines, and let's talk about different ways to use trade Trendlines. There's a few different ways that a trader can use trade Trendlines. Probably the most important is as a trigger to enter trades, hence the name, trade trend lines. This can be either through a break of the trend line or the trend line providing support and resistance. Another way to use trade trend lines are as targets for trades. A trend line can serve as a target area for a trade that is approaching the trend line in question. A trade trend line that triggers a trade also has built-in targets. The targets are the initiating point of the trend line and the defining point of the trend line. So you can see already that they're very useful in a lot of different ways, and I'll go into some of those. So here you see some price action developing, and with that price action, we can draw a trade trend line. So let's advance the price action a little bit, and here we see a close below the trade trend line. Now you've got the initiating point, here you've got the defining point, and after this third red candle down, we finally get a close below. The support doesn't hold. So now we want to take a short trade because we think this either is going into some consolidation that we can profit off of, or it's going to go into a new downtrend. That's what that signifies for us. I'm simplifying it, but that's one of the things it could signify. So let's talk about the built-in targets that are in a trade trend line. We already said in the last slide that those built-in targets are the initiating point and the defining point. So let's say that we took a short trade right here on Bitcoin. Let's say this is Bitcoin. So we enter our short trade, the price action unfolds. Here's the first target of the defining point that I was talking about. And here's the second target of the initiating point. Let's let that price action unfold, and there you go. Now, we created this chart, but you will see as you start drawing trade trend lines, you'll see how often once a trend line is broke, you get a price reaction at the defining point of the trend line that you've drawn. It happens quite frequently as to be one of the main things that we trade when we trade traditional markets or cryptos. It applies to both. Here we see an actual chart. That last slide was created price action, and here we see an actual chart. Here you've got some price action, and you've got an initiating point, and you've got a defining point. Here is the trend line in question. Now here we get a break of the trend line. I talked in the last slide how it might be some sideways movement that you can profit off of. Market gets up, but doesn't get through where we would have entered our stop in this particular trade. And then when it collapses, again, here is the reaction at the defining point. You get two long down candles, and then we get this long shadow because here is the market reacting to that defining point. So if we had entered the short trade here, our first target would be the defining point. Now as the price action continues to play out, you see a gap lower, and where do we see our next substantial reaction? Well, there's a gap here, but we're looking for places that the market will gravitate to that we can take profits. And you could see here, the initiating point was another one of those magnet targets. You can see the market comes down to it, basically touches it, and then shoots back up a few basis points higher. So here are the built-in targets in real world. This is a real traditional market chart, but it could have just as easily been a cryptocurrency. And if you're watching our videos, you'll see it happen in cryptocurrencies as well. Let me go ahead and turn it over to Mike to give you a little bit more information on this. Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Bob. So to continue with targets, we can also use these trade trend lines as trade targets. Trade trend lines also make great targets for taking some profits or even moving the stop. So even if a trader does not take profits at a trade trend line, they can use a price action reaching a trade trend line as a place where they can move a trailing stop. Sometimes trade trend lines will be so close together that they can distort reward to risk, so the trader may pass on the trade just because you don't know where it will stop. So if there's too many things in the way, it might not be a valid trade for you to take. So here we're using a trade trend line as a trade target. So we have our longer term trend line, which is initiating point, defining point. That defining point started a new initiating point, which gave a defining point. We then got to close above the trend line's defining point into what we call a section of clear path. Now, We could use a target all the way up at that initiating point, or we could find other targets like this longer term trend line, and you see it goes up there and we got a reaction. Yes, it did go up, but maybe this is you pull partial profits off, move your stop higher and trail it, or you take profits here, and then maybe this above here initiates a new longer trade. There's many ways you can do it, but you might not want to ignore this longer term trend line because you can see reactions to it. There's another concept we have called kiss the trend line goodbye. Occasionally, a triggered trade will come back and revisit the trend line and then proceed back in the direction of the trade. We call this kissing the trend line goodbye. This is a second trend entry, however, don't count on it always occurring. So let's see what it looks like on a chart. So here, let's say this was a trigger of a trend line trade, a closing above the trend line. It comes back down to retest that trend line area, which is what we call kissing it goodbye, and then moves back up. Many times if a trade initiates with incorrect reward to risk, or we work just in front of our computer when it triggered, we'll watch for a pullback to kiss the trend line goodbye as a potential entry point for our trade. And then you see another concept which we just covered, trend line as a target. This other longer term trend line was a pretty good target. Came up there, tested, stopped there, next candle, went through there, closed back below it, the next candle, broke through it and closed right at it. So that gave multiple opportunities to use this to get some of the trade off or possibly move your trailing stop. Here's another example. So initiating point, defining point becoming a new initiating point, defining point, get a close below that. Let's say that triggered a short trade, coming back up to kiss the trend line goodbye, coming back down and hitting our longer term trend line as a target. You see it was a pretty strong reaction there. Just another example of combining kissing the trend line goodbye and the trade trend line as a target. Turning it back over to Bob to wrap this up.
Thank you for that, Mike, and thank you guys for watching. There's obviously a lot more to learn on trend lines, but this gives you sort of a base of knowledge for when you're watching our free videos on YouTube. You can understand what we're saying when we're talking about trend lines or best fit lines or defining points, initiating points, or reasons why we might take a trade or not take a trade. If you want to learn more, you can follow us on Twitter at @path_trading, like us on Facebook, which is /Path Trading Partners. Or better yet, just go to our website, pathtradingpartners.com. There's a lot of stuff on there, free and otherwise. Sign up for all the free stuff. And please subscribe to our podcast, the Money Path Podcast. We've got a cryptocurrency section in there, and we talk a lot about just markets in general. Hit like and subscribe on this video. And thanks again for watching. This concludes our 3-part series for using trend lines with cryptocurrencies. Thanks, everybody. Mike, thank you. We'll talk to you guys in the next Path Chat. Cheers.